There is a man standing at the edge of paradise. He has seen things no living human being was meant to see. He has heard words spoken in a language that does not belong to this world. And when he returns, when he is pulled back into the weight of mortal flesh and the ordinary grief of earthly life, he is given a single, absolute command. Do not speak of this. That man is the Apostle Paul. The year is somewhere around 42 AD, and the place he visited, the place he described only in fragments, only in the third person, as though even naming himself as the witness was too sacred a claim, is called, in his own words, the third heaven. 2 Corinthians chapter 12, verse 2. Write it slowly. I know a man in Christ who 14 years ago was caught up to the third heaven. Whether in the body or out of the body, I do not know. God knows. 14 years of silence. 14 years of carrying the unspeakable. What did Paul see? What did he hear? And why? In a man who wrote with fearless authority about resurrection, judgment, and the deep things of God. Why was this the one revelation he was forbidden to fully share? Welcome to Bible Secrets, Hidden History. Before we unlock these ancient archives, consider subscribing so the next sealed vault finds you waiting. Chapter 1. The Mystery. What did the ancient world understand by the third heaven? The seeker who comes to 2 Corinthians chapter 12 with modern eyes reads the phrase, third heaven, and moves past it quickly. We live in an age that has flattened the cosmos into a single sky. But the ancient world, the world of Paul, of the rabbis, of the apocalyptic writers who preserved their visions in texts that would be hidden for centuries, understood the heavens as a structured architecture, layered, ordered. Each realm distinct in its nature, its inhabitants, and its proximity to the divine throne. This was not mythology. This was theology. The Hebrew word most commonly translated as heaven is shamayim, a plural form, literally rendered the heavens. Never a single undifferentiated space. The rabbinical tradition formalized this plurality into a doctrine of multiple heavens, ranging in different traditions from 3 to 7 distinct realms, each presiding over different dimensions of creation, judgment, and divine presence. The oldest stratum of this tradition counts 3 heavens. The first heaven, Vylon, in the Talmudic reckoning, is the visible sky, the vault of clouds and stars, the lower atmosphere of the created world. This is the heaven that every human eye can see. It is the outermost layer, closest to the dust. The second heaven holds a more contested character across the ancient sources. In certain traditions, it is the realm of suspended judgment, the dwelling place of souls awaiting the final accounting, or the domain where spiritual powers conduct their movements between the earthly and the divine. But the third heaven, Shehakim, the heaven of grinding, or in other reckonings, shamayim, the high heaven, is the place of direct divine presence, the place where the manna was ground for Israel's wilderness years, the place, according to multiple ancient traditions, where the Garden of Eden in its original and unfallen form still exists, where the tree of life still stands, where the righteous dead dwell in the immediate light of God. This is the place Paul was taken. And here is the first knowledge bombshell the ancient record conceals in plain sight. Paul uses 2 distinct Greek words in his account. The first is harpazo, the word translated caught up. This is not a gentle word. Harpazo means to be seized, snatched, taken by force. The same word used in the book of Revelation for the child caught up to God's throne. The same word from which the theological concept of rapture derives. Paul was not led gently upward. He was taken, suddenly, irresistibly, without preparation. The second word is paradisos, paradise. The Greek transliteration of the ancient Persian word paradisa, meaning a walled royal garden, an enclosed place of exceeding beauty accessible only by the permission of the king. Paul was seized and brought to the king's garden, and then silence. Chapter 2. The revelation, the forbidden words, and the texts that dared to imagine them. Paul himself gives us almost nothing. He writes in the third person. He distances himself from the experience with deliberate grammatical humility. He admits he does not know if the journey occurred in the body or outside it. And then he delivers the line that has haunted biblical scholarship for 2,000 years. 2 Corinthians 12, verse 4. He was caught up into paradise and heard inexpressible words, which it is not lawful for a man to utter. Not lawful. The Greek is ouk exon. Not permitted, not allowed, carrying the weight of divine prohibition. Paul was not merely being modest. He was not protecting a private spiritual experience from public misunderstanding. He was under a command. The words he heard in the third heaven were areta, a word meaning both unutterable and forbidden to be spoken. Things that belong to a register of divine speech that human language cannot hold without breaking. For most of Christian history, this is where the trail ends. The church canonized Paul's restraint. His silence became sacred. But the ancient world was not entirely silent. In the late 4th or early 5th century, scholars place its composition between 380 and 420 AD. A text circulated in the Christian communities of Egypt and Syria under the title Apocalypsis Pauli, the Apocalypse of Paul. Its opening claim is extraordinary. The text presents itself as the actual content of Paul's forbidden revelation, the full vision that the apostle recorded privately and sealed away, only to be discovered buried beneath his house in Tarsus during the reign of the Emperor Theodosius. The discovery story was almost certainly legendary, but the vision itself draws on a tradition far older than its late antique composition. Scholars, including Martha Himmelfarb and Jan Bremer, have traced the apocalypse of Paul's cosmological framework to earlier Jewish apocalyptic sources, particularly the Book of Enoch and the Apocalypse of Zephaniah, both of which predate Paul himself. What does the Apocalypse of Paul describe? It describes Paul ascending through multiple heavenly realms, escorted by an angel. He witnesses the souls of the righteous being welcomed into rest by angels of extraordinary radiance. He witnesses the souls of the wicked being subjected to varied and precise judgments, each punishment calibrated to the specific nature of the transgression committed in life. He hears the created order itself, the sun, the sea, the earth, crying out to God for permission to execute judgment on human sin. And each time, God's voice responds with patience, with mercy, with the instruction to wait, to give humanity more time. At the pinnacle of the vision, Paul arrives in the city of Christ, a place of unimaginable light. 4 rivers flowing with honey and milk and oil and wine, trees of eternal fruit. The patriarchs and prophets gathered in radiant rest. And there, in the heart of this place, he encounters something the text lingers over with unmistakable reverence: the river of rest, the Acherusian lake. The text calls it, borrowing imagery from the ancient world and baptizing it in divine light, where souls are washed before entering into the presence of God. The vision is vast. The vision is structured. The vision is a cosmos of divine justice operating with absolute precision and absolute mercy simultaneously. And the Dead Sea Scrolls offer something adjacent and older still. Among the Qumran fragments, the Songs of the Sabbath Sacrifice, a liturgical cycle discovered in Cave 4, describes the heavenly temple in such intricate detail that scholars believe it reflects an actual visionary tradition practiced within the Qumran community. 7 angelic choirs, 7 heavenly sanctuaries, a divine throne surrounded by Ophanim, the wheel angels of Ezekiel, singing in layered, counterpointed praise. This is the acoustic landscape of the third heaven. This is the sound of the place Paul entered. He heard these words, and he was told, "Not yet, not for you to carry, not in language the earth can hold." But what the ancient texts reveal in their final account changes everything we thought we understood about why this was hidden and what it means for us. Chapter 3, the meaning why the silence is itself the message here, is the question that has waited beneath this entire investigation. Why would God show Paul the deepest architecture of heaven, the structure of divine justice, the radiance of the blessed dead, the sound of angelic liturgy, and then command him to seal it? What is the purpose of a revelation that cannot be revealed? The seeker who looks closely enough finds the answer not in the Apocalypse of Paul, not in the Dead Sea Scrolls, but in the very passage that Paul chose to share. Because Paul did not come back from the third heaven and say nothing. He came back and said something very specific. He said, "I was given a thorn in my flesh." 2 Corinthians 12, verse 7. Immediately after the most elevated spiritual experience in human history, outside of Moses on Sinai, Paul was given suffering. He begged God 3 times to remove it. God's answer, preserved in Scripture with the full weight of canonical authority, is perhaps the most quoted divine response in all of Christian history. "My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness." This is the architecture Paul was shown in the third heaven, rendered into lived human experience. The vision was not sealed to protect a divine secret. The vision was sealed because it cannot be fully transmitted in words. It can only be transmitted in a life. The full revelation of paradise is not a verbal description. It is what happens to a human being who has stood in that light, and then returned to ordinary suffering with the absolute and unshakable knowledge that the ordinary suffering is not the final word. Paul never described what he saw, but Paul's life after the vision is a description of it. The man who was seized into paradise and heard forbidden words became the man who wrote, from a Roman prison cell awaiting execution, "I have learned, in whatever state I am, to be content." Philippians 4, verse 11. "I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me." Verse 13. These are not the words of a man managing his spiritual expectations. These are the words of a man who has seen what comes after, who knows with the certainty of direct witness that the architecture of divine justice and mercy he saw in the third heaven is real and permanent and waiting. The vision was given not to be spoken but to be lived into. And this is what it means for the seeker who receives this ancient testimony today. You have not been caught up to the third heaven. You have not heard the forbidden words, but you have been given the testimony of a man who was. You have been given, in the words Paul chose to share rather than withhold, an account of a God whose patience outlasts human sin, whose mercy operates with the precision of justice, whose light is so real that a man who glimpsed it spent the rest of his life writing about weakness. Because only in weakness does the reality of that light become fully visible in a human life. The silence of Paul is not a deprivation. It is an invitation. It is an invitation to understand that the deepest truths about divine reality are not transferred through information. They are transferred through encounter. Through the slow, faithful accumulation of a life lived in trust. Through suffering that does not destroy. Through uncertainty that does not collapse into despair. Through the persistent and absolutely mysterious sense that something beyond the visible world is holding the structure of your life with a care more precise than any human planning. What Paul saw in the third heaven is described finally, not in the apocalypse of Paul or the songs of the Sabbath sacrifice, but in the human beings throughout history who have carried great suffering and emerged from it not broken, but luminous. The ones who, like Paul, cannot fully tell you what they know, but whose lives somehow make you believe it. Conclusion. The question posed at the beginning was this: what did Paul see in the third heaven, and why was he forbidden to speak? The answer, drawn from the ancient record, is this: he saw the full architecture of divine reality, justice and mercy operating as a single living system, and he was forbidden to speak because that reality cannot be carried in words. It can only be carried in a transformed life. Consider what this asks of you. Every human life contains its own sealed chamber, experiences too deep for ordinary language, encounters with grief or grace or inexplicable peace that you have never found the words to fully describe to another person. The ancient tradition preserved in Paul's testimony does not ask you to explain these moments. It asks you only to recognize them for what they are: contact points between your mortal existence and an order of reality that is older, larger, and more merciful than anything the visible world can demonstrate. You are not being kept from the truth. You are being invited into it, not through information, but through the same door Paul entered. The willingness to be seized, to be taken somewhere beyond your own understanding, and to return changed. To live, from that point forward, as a testimony that something real and vast and luminous exists on the other side of what you can see. The third heaven is not a place reserved for apostles. It is the destination that waits, according to the ancient record, for every soul that has ever trusted beyond the edge of sight. The archives of hidden history are vast. The next chapter awaits. In the sealed libraries of the ancient world, beside the testimony of Paul, lie the visions of other witnesses, men and women who stood at the threshold of the divine and returned carrying fragments of a truth too large for any single life to contain. Their accounts are waiting. This has been Bible Secrets, Hidden History. The truth does not decay, it only waits.